Did you experience anything unusual when you went to look at the Epstein files, the unredacted files at the DOJ? And what do you make of that DOJ explanation?
I mean, first, the explanation is horrific and bogus. I mean, let's be really clear. The DOJ and Pam Bondi are essentially spying on members of Congress and what they're searching for in the Epstein files. I think that Speaker Johnson is right to make his comments, but that was not an oversight. I mean, that clearly is intentional. Now, there's information there that's redacted that shouldn't be. There's names. I personally saw names of billionaires and very powerful people that had no business with their names being redacted, and yet they're not redacting names of survivors and the victims of rape and sexual abuse. So the whole thing is shameful, and quite frankly, Pam Bondi should resign or should be removed from office.
What we just witnessed is the complete and total meltdown of the Attorney General of the United States in front of Congress, live on camera for the entire country to see. And the fallout is going to be devastating. Pam Bondi walked into that hearing room thinking she could dodge, deflect, and talk her way out of what might be the biggest cover-up in modern American government. She walked out 5 hours later with her career in ashes, her credibility destroyed, and her own political base screaming for her resignation.
And as we say here today, there are over 1,000 sex trafficking victims, and you have not held a single man accountable. Shame on you. If you had any decency, you would resign right after this hearing concludes.
The gentleman has expired.
Not Democrats, not the usual critics, her own people, MAGA Republicans, Trump loyalists. The very foundation of her political support has crumbled beneath her feet, and now she is standing on quicksand. This is about the Epstein files, over 3.5 million documents that the Department of Justice was supposed to release.
White House also remains on the defense when it comes to their handling of the Epstein files. What's the latest there?
Yeah, Craig, over the weekend in a letter sent to Congress, Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Justice Department has released all of the millions of the Epstein files required by law. But some lawmakers are arguing that release is still insufficient and that there are still crucial files missing. The DOJ also provided a long list of more than 300 high-profile names mentioned in the files, but critics from both parties are calling that decision a way to muddy the waters and to distract from who really is a predator.
Documents that survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes have been fighting for years to see. Documents that the MAGA base demanded be made public as part of Trump's promise to drain the swamp and expose corruption. And instead of transparency, instead of justice, instead of protecting victims, the DOJ allegedly did something else entirely.
Mr. Chairman, I want to begin by acknowledging the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's horrific abuse who are in the room with us today. I want to thank all of you for your bravery in speaking out. I want to say that you and the other survivors of these heinous crimes deserve better from this Department of Justice. In particular, it is shocking that the department did not redact the names of Epstein's victims, but it did redact the names of their abusers. I don't know whether this was done out of incompetence or whether it was deliberate and malicious, but either way, it is completely unacceptable. Even more troubling, the DOJ has failed to bring any of these perpetrators to justice. Instead, it has engaged in a relentless pursuit of Donald Trump's perceived enemies.
They buried files. They protected powerful people. They exposed victims. And when the Attorney General was called to explain herself, she had nothing. No answers, no explanations, just insults, deflection, and a desperate attempt to change the subject to the economy. Now the calls for her resignation are coming from everywhere. Democrats, obviously, but also Republicans, also MAGA conservatives, also the grassroots Trump supporters who were supposed to be her shield. They are all turning on her. And the reason is simple. Either Pam Bondi has no idea what her own department is doing, which makes her incompetent, or she knows exactly what happened and is covering it up, which makes her complicit. Neither option allows her to stay in office. Neither option allows her to keep her job. And the walls are closing in fast. Let me take you inside that hearing room so you understand exactly what happened and why it matters. 5 hours. 5 hours of testimony. 5 hours of lawmakers asking the Attorney General of the United States basic, fundamental questions about what her department did with the Epstein files. What happened to the documents? Why were victims exposed? Why were powerful co-conspirators protected? Who made these decisions? What was the reasoning? These are not complicated questions. These are not obscure legal technicalities. These are the questions that any attorney general should be able to answer about a massive document release that her own department handled. And Bondi answered none of them. Instead of answering, she went on rambling tangents about the economy. She talked about unemployment numbers. She talked about job growth. She talked about everything except the Epstein files. Instead of answering, she insulted lawmakers. She called one of them a washed-up loser lawyer. She mocked the process. She acted like she was above the entire proceeding, like she was too important to explain what her own department did. Instead of answering, she did what guilty people do when they are cornered. She deflected, she dodged, she tried to change the subject. And after 5 hours, the result was zero. Zero substantive answers. Zero explanations, zero clarifications about what the DOJ did or didn't do. The only thing that became clear is that Pam Bondi either does not know what is happening in the department she runs, or she knows and is covering it up. There is no third option. There is no innocent explanation for refusing to answer basic questions about a scandal that involves the potential exposure of sexual assault victims and the protection of powerful co-conspirators. But here is what makes this moment truly devastating. The survivors were there, victims of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, people who have been fighting for years to get answers about what happened to them, about who enabled Epstein, about who protected him. They sat in that audience for 5 hours watching the Attorney General of the United States treat their quest for justice like a joke. They watched her dodge questions about documents that contain information about their own victimization. They watched her insult lawmakers instead of giving them answers. And that is not just incompetence. That is cruelty. That is the kind of thing that makes people lose faith in the entire system. Now let me tell you about the leaked memos, because this is the evidence that is going to destroy Pam Bondi's career. We are talking about internal Department of Justice documents, official communications, emails and memos from career prosecutors, the people who actually understand the law, who have spent decades enforcing it, who are supposed to be the institutional backbone of the DOJ. And those career prosecutors warned their superiors that what was happening with the Epstein files was illegal. They said the redactions were improper. They said victims were being exposed when the law required them to be protected. They said powerful people were being protected when the evidence suggested they should be exposed. They said this violates the law. They said this is wrong. And what happened to those warnings? Nothing. They were ignored. The career prosecutors, the experts, the people who know the law inside and out were overruled. The department leadership under Pam Bondi's watch went ahead and released documents that exposed victims while protecting powerful co-conspirators. That is not a mistake. That is not incompetence. That is a pattern. That is deliberate. And the leaked memos prove it. They prove that people inside the DOJ knew what was happening, knew it was illegal, and were overruled anyway. They prove that the decision to release the documents the way they were released was not an accident. It was a choice. And that choice was made under Pam Bondi's leadership. And then there is the other piece, the alleged surveillance. According to the leaked memos, the DOJ did not just mishandle the Epstein files. They allegedly spied on members of Congress who were investigating the Epstein files. Specifically, they are accused of surveilling Representative Pramila Jayapal and other lawmakers who were demanding answers about what happened. That is not just a violation of law. That is a constitutional crisis. That is the executive branch using the Department of Justice to spy on the legislative branch. That is the kind of thing that threatens the separation of powers. That is the kind of thing that undermines democracy itself. And Pam Bondi is the Attorney General. She is responsible for everything that happens in her department. She cannot claim ignorance. She cannot claim she was not involved. When your department violates the law, when your people warn you about violations and you ignore them, when your department is accused of spying on Congress, that is on you. That is your responsibility. And you cannot dodge that. You cannot deflect that. You cannot talk about the economy to make that go away. The most devastating part of this entire story is who is calling for Bondi's resignation. If it were just Democrats, Bondi could survive that. Democratic criticism is expected. It is part of the job. It comes with the territory. You can brush it off as partisan politics. You can say they are just attacking you because you work for Trump. But when the calls for resignation come from your own side, when they come from MAGA Republicans, from Trump loyalists, from the people who are supposed to be your allies, that is when you know you are finished. Look at what Representative Thomas Massie said. Massie is a Trump-endorsed MAGA Republican. He has been loyal to Trump for years. He is not a rhino. He is not a never-Trumper. He is exactly the kind of person who should be defending Pam Bondi. And after watching her testimony, after watching her refuse to answer questions for 5 hours, after watching her insult lawmakers instead of explaining what happened, Massie said she did not answer anything. She seems kind of crazy, and she needs to resign. That is devastating. When a MAGA Republican who has been endorsed by Trump says your attorney general seems crazy and needs to resign, the game is over. When the grassroots Trump supporters who were promised transparency on the Epstein files start calling for Bondi's head because they feel betrayed, there is no coming back from that. The coalition that was supposed to protect her has fractured. The people who would normally defend her no matter what are now demanding her ouster. And without that coalition, she has nothing. She has no political cover. She has no defenders. She is alone. And the worst part is that Bondi did this to herself. She did not have to insult lawmakers. She did not have to call anyone a washed-up loser lawyer. She could have answered the questions. She could have said she would look into it. She could have taken responsibility. She could have done 100 different things that would have been better than what she did. But instead, she chose to mock the process. She chose to treat the hearing like a political rally instead of a legitimate inquiry into what her department did. And now everyone remembers that moment. That is the clip that is going to play over and over again. That is the moment that defines her. Let me break down the 4 things you need to understand about where this is headed, because the trajectory here is clear, and it is devastating for Bondi and for the Trump administration. Bondi has lost her base. This is the most important factor in any political survival calculation. When you are in a crisis, you need your coalition to hold together. You need the people who put you in office to defend you. And Bondi's coalition was supposed to be MAGA Republicans and Trump loyalists. That coalition has now completely fractured. The MAGA base feels betrayed. They were promised transparency on the Epstein files. They were promised that Trump would expose the corruption. They were promised that the swamp would be drained. And instead, they got a cover-up. Instead, they got victims exposed and powerful people protected. Instead, they got an attorney general who insults lawmakers instead of answering questions. And now they want her gone. When your own base is calling for your resignation, there is no recovery. There is no political path forward. The evidence of cover-up is documented. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is not someone making an accusation at a rally. This is leaked memos from inside the DOJ. This is documentation from career prosecutors warning about illegal redactions. This is evidence that can be used in court. This is evidence that can be presented to Congress, and Bondi cannot explain it away. She cannot deflect it forever. She cannot talk about the economy and make it disappear. The evidence exists. It is written down. It shows a pattern of conduct that looks exactly like a cover-up. And the more she refuses to answer questions about it, the more guilty she looks. Contempt of Congress charges are likely coming. When you are called before Congress and asked specific questions about your department's actions and you refuse to provide substantive answers, that is contempt of Congress. That is a federal crime. That is behavior that can get you prosecuted. And Bondi did that for 5 hours. She refused to answer. She dodged. She deflected. She insulted lawmakers instead of answering. She talked about the economy instead of addressing a potential cover-up. That is the kind of behavior that federal prosecutors can charge. So now Bondi is not just facing calls for resignation. She is not just facing removal from office. She is facing potential criminal charges. She is facing the possibility of jail time. And that changes everything. The administration's legal credibility is collapsing. This is the big picture. We have Trump facing jail threats from judges for defying court orders. We have cabinet members facing contempt charges. And now we have the Attorney General potentially obstructing justice and covering up crimes. That is not an administration that respects the rule of law. That is not an administration that is tough on crime. That is an administration that is using the government to protect powerful people and cover up scandals. And voters notice that. That affects how people vote. That affects the midterms. That affects whether Republicans can hold on to their majorities. So what comes next? Let me walk you through the next few weeks. Bondi is going to try to tough it out. She is going to try to stay in office. She is going to hope that this blows over, that the news cycle moves on, that people forget about the Epstein files and the leaked memos and the 5 hours of testimony where she refused to answer anything. But it is not going to blow over. The memos are real. The evidence is there. And the pressure is only going to increase. House Republicans are going to keep subpoenaing her. The media is going to keep covering this. Every day she stays, it gets worse. It makes Trump look worse. It makes the administration look worse. It reminds voters that the Attorney General is potentially covering up crimes. And eventually, Trump is going to have to cut her loose. He is going to have to distance himself from her. He is going to have to let her go because she is becoming a liability, and when Trump stops defending her, when he stops protecting her, that is when she is done. And what happens when Bondi resigns or gets forced out? First, there is the chaos factor. You have to replace the Attorney General. You have to find someone who can handle the job. You have to get them confirmed by the Senate. That takes time. That takes energy. That takes political capital that Trump needs for other things. Second, there is the scandal factor. When Bondi falls, the story is going to be everywhere. The Epstein files, the cover-up, the alleged spying on Congress. All of it comes out. All of it gets litigated in the press. All of it shapes how people view the Trump administration. Third, there is the precedent factor. If Bondi gets pushed out, if she faces contempt of Congress charges, that emboldens other investigations. That makes it harder for other cabinet members to stay quiet. That makes it harder for the administration to maintain control over the narrative. Here is the bottom line. Pam Bondi panicked in that hearing because she knows she is guilty. She knows what happened with the Epstein files. She knows about the cover-up. She knows about the alleged spying on Congress. She knows that career prosecutors warned about the redactions. She knows that victims were exposed while powerful people were protected. And she cannot answer questions about any of it because if she tells the truth, if she admits what happened, she is admitting to crimes. So she dodged. She insulted lawmakers. She deflected to the economy. She did everything except answer the questions. And in doing that, she confirmed everyone's suspicions. She proved that there is something seriously wrong at the Department of Justice under her leadership. She proved that there is a cover-up happening, and now she is facing the consequences. The calls for her resignation are coming from every direction. Her own base has turned on her. The evidence against her is documented. Contempt of Congress charges are likely, and the administration's legal credibility is collapsing around her. This is going to dominate news cycles for weeks. This is going to shape how people view the Trump administration. This is going to affect the midterms. This is going to result in Bondi's resignation or removal from office, and it is going to potentially result in criminal charges and prosecution. All of it stems from one thing. The Department of Justice, under Pam Bondi's leadership, allegedly covered up the Epstein files. They exposed victims instead of protecting them. They protected powerful people instead of exposing them. And when called to account for what happened, the Attorney General of the United States had nothing to say. No answers, no explanations, just panic, just deflection, just the desperate attempt of someone who knows the walls are closing in.